Zy'Liara floated silently through the corridors of Outpost Orion 7, her elongated fingers pressed together in contemplation. The station's artificial gravity made her people's natural grace seem exaggerated, each step almost too delicate for the steel beneath her feet. She found human architecture rigid and confining, all harsh angles and sterile functionality, a reflection of their chaotic nature. Still, she had been sent here to understand them. She exhaled softly, centering herself. The human she was assigned to observe was waiting for her at the entrance to the lower docking bay. Lieutenant Jack Carter. His name alone felt blunt, a collection of sounds without elegance. When she first met him, he had grinned broadly and clapped a hand against her shoulder in greeting, a gesture that nearly sent her into a full defensive reflex. He was loud, irreverent, and oddly unbreakable. She found that last part the most difficult to accept. The Vel'Kari, her species, were delicate creatures. They did not heal in the way humans did. If they were wounded, their bodies entered a regenerative stasis, an efficient biological response, but one that made injury a significant ordeal. Humans, by contrast, seemed to revel in their own fragility, throwing themselves into danger without hesitation. Zy'Liara had seen footage of them in combat, had heard stories of their resilience, but standing beside one in real life was something else entirely. "Morning, Princess," Carter said as she approached. His grin was as easy as his posture, leaning against a crate labeled caution, explosive components with infuriating nonchalance. He was taller than she was, broad-shouldered and solid, his uniform slightly disheveled in that distinctly human way. "I'm not a princess," Zy'Liara replied, her voice cool and precise. "My designation is Observer Zy'Liara of the Vel'Kari Exchange." Carter smirked. Yeah, but you walk like royalty, all floaty and dignified." She chose not to dignify that with a response. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. Today's duty was simple: assist Carter with security checks in the docking bay and record observations. It should have been uneventful. It was not. A deep rumbling noise shuddered through the walls, followed by the wail of proximity alarms. Zy'Liara stiffened as Carter's expression flickered from amusement to sharp, practiced focus. The voice of the station's automated system crackled overhead. "Warning. Mechanical failure detected in Cargo Bay 3. Structural integrity compromised. Evacuate immediately." Carter was already moving. "That's us," he called over his shoulder. "Let's go." Zy'Liara hesitated. Logic dictated that they should wait for engineering crews, allow specialists to handle the failure. But Carter wasn't slowing, and a strange compulsion pushed her to follow. The cargo bay was vast, filled with towering storage units and stacked metal crates secured by heavy-duty clamps. At its center, a loading mechanism had partially collapsed, its support struts twisted and sparking with exposed wiring. A cargo lift, half suspended, dangled at a precarious angle, its chains groaning under the strain. "Damn," Carter muttered. "Looks like the autolocks failed. That thing's gonna come down." He tapped his earpiece. "Control, this is Carter. Cargo Bay 3's lift is compromised. We need a lockdown in..." A shrieking snap cut through the air. One of the chains gave way. The lift lurched, and Zy'Liara barely had time to react before Carter shoved her aside. She tumbled backward, catching herself against a storage unit as the lift crashed down. Asterisk on him, asterisk. The impact was thunderous. The dust settled, revealing Carter pinned beneath a massive steel crate that had been thrown from the lift's platform. His right arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, his left leg trapped beneath the weight. Zy'Liara's breath caught in her throat. He should be unconscious. Any Vel'Kari would be. His body should have entered stasis immediately to protect itself. But Carter was still awake. He exhaled sharply, blinking up at the ceiling with a grimace. Then he looked at her. "Well," he said, "that could have gone better." She stared, unable to process what she was seeing. You were injured." "Yeah, no kidding." Carter winced as he shifted slightly, testing his mobility. "Not the worst I've had, though. Nothing's broken." "Oh, wait. Nope, that's broken." He let out a short, pained laugh. Laughter? Laughter? Zy'Liara's pulse raced. She activated her communicator. Medical emergency in Cargo Bay 3. A human has sustained serious trauma. Hey, hold on, Carter interrupted. He lifted his uninjured hand in a placating gesture. I can fix this. She felt her own mind recoil at those words. Fix? What could he possibly mean? His bones were displaced. No amount of willpower could undo biological damage. And then, to her absolute horror, he grabbed his right arm and yanked it back into place. A sickening pop echoed through the bay. Zy'Liara's vision blurred at the edges. Her body responded on instinct, flooding her system with biochemical distress signals. Her kind were not meant to witness such things. Her breath came shallow and sharp. Carter, meanwhile, groaned in relief. He flexed his fingers experimentally. All right, that's better. She took an unsteady step forward, every part of her mind screaming at her to comprehend what she had just seen. That is not how healing works. For you, maybe. Carter grinned, still grimacing through the pain. For humans, sometimes you just gotta snap things back into place. She swallowed, fighting down nausea. That is monstrous. Hey now, don't go calling me names. Carter pushed against the crate, pinning his leg. His face tightened as he tried to move it. All right, gonna need some help with this part. Zy'Liara hesitated. Every instinct told her to wait for medical teams, to rely on proper procedure. But Carter was looking at her expectantly, as if he trusted her to act. Her hands trembled as she reached for the emergency release on the crate's side. With a hiss of compressed air, the mechanism disengaged, and she helped lever it off his trapped leg. Carter let out a breath as he pulled himself free. Then he tried to stand, and immediately collapsed as his knee buckled sideways. Zy'Liara's stomach lurched. You cannot move. You require medical. Nah, just one more fix. Carter gritted his teeth. Before she could stop him, he braced his hands against the floor, asterisk, and slammed his knee back into place, asterisk. She choked on a strangled sound, horror clawing at her throat. Carter, for his part, simply exhaled. Then he laughed. Oh man, he said. That's always the worst one. Zy'Liara could only stare. Humans were insane. Zy'Liara could not look away. Her mind rebelled against the scene before her, against the sheer wrongness of it. The human was laughing, despite the grotesque act he had just performed upon himself. His body had been broken, twisted into unnatural angles, and yet, with nothing more than brute force and sheer will, he had reset it as though he were merely adjusting an ill-fitted garment. It defied reason. It defied everything she knew about life, about pain, about survival. Carter stretched his leg experimentally, rolling his ankle as if to confirm his limb was still functional. He winced, but the smirk on his face remained. Yep, that should hold. Might be sore for a few days, though. Zy'Liara's hands curled into fists at her sides. You should be in medical stasis. Her voice was tight, clipped. Your body should not allow movement after such trauma. You should not be behaving like this. He raised an eyebrow at her, amusement flickering across his expression. Behaving like what? Like none of this matters. Her words came faster now, each syllable edged with disbelief. You have suffered multiple skeletal injuries. Your nervous system should be overwhelmed. And yet you laugh. Carter shrugged, rolling his shoulder as if shaking off a minor discomfort. I mean, it hurt like hell, if that makes you feel any better. He chuckled. But pain's just pain, you know? It doesn't have to stop you. Zy'Liara took a step back, shaking her head. That is not how pain works. Maybe not for you. He tilted his head, studying her. Your people, go into some kind of healing coma if they get hurt. She forced herself to steady her breathing. This conversation should not be happening. You should be unconscious, or, at the very least, incapacitated. Yes, she answered finally. Our bodies prioritize regeneration above all else. Any severe injury triggers an automatic stasis response to prevent further harm. Carter exhaled sharply through his nose. Huh, must be nice. Nice. The word caught in her throat, foreign in the context of this madness. It is necessary. If we did not have such mechanisms, we would die. His expression shifted, a thoughtful crease forming between his brows. Guess that's the difference, then? We don't get that luxury. He tapped his temple. Human bodies don't shut down just because we get banged up. Hell, sometimes the adrenaline kicks in, and we don't even realize how bad it is until later. Zy'Liara swallowed. That was the most horrifying part. He had functioned through the pain, had set his own bones, had laughed in the face of an injury that should have crippled him. And he spoke about it so casually. A deep unease settled in her chest. It was not only that humans endured pain, it was that they seemed almost indifferent to it. No, more than indifferent. They accepted it, even welcomed it as part of their existence. The thought made her stomach churn. Carter shifted his weight and sucked in a breath. All right, maybe laughing wasn't the best idea. That actually does hurt. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I should probably get checked out, though, just in case. She latched onto the suggestion immediately. Yes, the medical bay. That is the only rational course of action. He chuckled at her urgency, but didn't argue, instead gesturing toward the exit. All right, lead the way, princess. She did not correct him this time. They walked in silence, though it was not a comfortable one. Zy'Liara could still hear the echo of those sickening pops, still feel the unnatural certainty with which Carter had set his own limbs. Every so often, he would roll his shoulder or stretch his fingers, as if testing his body's limits. It made her want to recoil all over again. At last, she could no longer contain her thoughts. Does your entire species possess this tolerance? Carter smirked. More or less. Some better than others. Soldiers tend to get used to it. Her stomach twisted. You train for this? Well, yeah, he said, as if it were obvious. You don't always have the luxury of waiting for a medic in the middle of a fight. Sometimes you gotta patch yourself up and keep going. She stared at him, feeling as though she were gazing at a creature not of flesh and blood, but something else entirely. Something impossible. That is unnatural. He snorted. Not unnatural. Just different. He glanced at her, expression turning slightly more serious. Let me ask you something. If you got hurt real bad and your body did that healing stasis thing, how long would it take to fix you up? She hesitated. It depends on the severity of the injury. A fractured limb might take hours. More extensive damage, days. He nodded. And during that time, you'd be what? Asleep? Essentially, yes. Carter whistled low. Yeah. See, that's the problem. Humans don't have that option. You drop in the middle of a battlefield. You're as good as dead. You either push through or you don't make it. The logic was sound, but it horrified her nonetheless. Pain was meant to be a warning, a deterrent to further harm. It was not something to be mastered. Carter sighed, shaking his head. I get why it freaks you out, though. You guys probably never had to evolve for this kind of crap. She exhaled slowly. No, we did not. He grinned. Well, hey, maybe we're just built different. She did not laugh. They reached the medical bay, and Zy'Liara felt an almost visceral relief as the sterile, controlled environment replaced the chaos of the cargo bay. A human medic approached, already scanning Carter with a handheld device. You look like hell, Lieutenant, the medic muttered. Carter grinned. You should have seen the other guy. The medic gave him a flat look. You're the other guy. Exactly. Zy'Liara folded her arms, watching the exchange in stunned silence. The absurdity of it was almost too much. Here was a human who had endured what should have been incapacitating injuries, who had set his own bones with his bare hands, and he joked as if none of it mattered. The medic finished his scan and sighed. Well, you're lucky. Nothing shattered, just some bad sprains and minor fractures. We'll patch you up and have you good to go in no time. Carter shot Zy'Liara a triumphant look. Told you it wasn't that bad. She turned away, unable to watch any longer. Humans were reckless. Their biology was reckless. Their very existence was reckless. And yet, somehow, impossibly, they survived. That, she realized with a shudder, was the most terrifying part of all. Zy'Liara watched as the human medic worked, pressing a regeneration pad against Carter's shoulder and injecting a cocktail of nanite accelerants into his bloodstream. The entire process was disconcertingly swift. Within moments, his minor fractures were stabilizing, and his sprains were already knitting back together. It was yet another contradiction of the human condition, so fragile in form, yet so relentless in recovery. Carter stretched his arm experimentally, rolling his shoulder with an approving nod. Damn, I love this stuff. Almost makes breaking things worth it. Zy'Liara's expression tightened. That statement is entirely irrational. He chuckled. Yeah, maybe, but you have to admit it's pretty cool. She did not have to admit anything of the sort. She had spent her entire life understanding biological limits, the delicate balance between preservation and adaptation. The Vel'Kari were not weak. They were precise, efficient. They did not push past pain, they avoided it. And yet, here stood a human who treated suffering as if it were a mere inconvenience, something to be overcome rather than respected. A troubling thought settled in her mind. It was not just that humans survived pain. It was that they embraced it. The medic packed away his equipment and patted Carter's uninjured shoulder. You'll be stiff for a bit, but you're cleared for duty. Try not to get yourself crushed again. No promises, Carter said with a smirk. Zy'Liara followed him as he exited the medical bay, her mind still circling the impossible reality of what she had witnessed. Finally, she spoke. You are reckless. Yup, Carter said, unbothered. You could have died, but I didn't. She exhaled sharply. That is not the point. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Then what is the point, princess? She hesitated, the words forming carefully in her mind before she let them pass her lips. Pain is meant to warn. It is meant to protect. Your kind disregards it, bends it to your will. You treat suffering as something that must be endured rather than avoided. That is illogical. Carter studied her for a moment, his usual amusement tempered by something quieter, something thoughtful. It's not about ignoring pain, he said. It's about what comes after it. She frowned. Elaborate. He scratched the back of his head, considering his words. All right, look. You guys shut down when you're hurt, right? Your bodies go into healing stasis, and you don't wake up until you're good as new. She nodded. That is the most effective way to ensure survival. Sure, he agreed. But that means you're out of the fight. You don't get a say in what happens next. You just stop. Zy'Liara stiffened. The idea of losing control during vulnerability was not something she had ever questioned. It was natural, necessary. Carter's voice softened slightly. Humans don't get that luxury. When we get hurt, we don't have time to shut down. We have to keep going. Not because we don't feel pain, but because there are things more important than pain. She stared at him, something cold curling at the edges of her thoughts. More important? His gaze didn't waver. Yeah, like protecting the people who need us. Like making sure we're still standing when it matters. He gestured to himself. I could have waited for medics back there. Could have gone down and let someone else handle it. But what if someone else had gotten hurt while I was waiting to heal? What if you had? Her breath caught. She had not considered that. Had not thought beyond the immediate horror of his injuries, beyond the illogic of his response. But he had. Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair. Pain sucks, but it reminds us we're alive. It reminds us that we can still do something. And sometimes, pushing through it is the only way to make sure we all get out in one piece. Zy'Liara looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she understood. The resilience of humanity was not in their biology. It was not in their reckless ability to ignore injury or their absurd methods of self-repair. It was in their refusal to surrender. They did not endure pain because they had to. They endured it because they chose to. A slow realization settled over her, one that both fascinated and unsettled her in equal measure. Humans were not unbreakable. They were not immune to suffering, but they had decided that pain would not define them. She had always believed that strength came from avoiding harm. But now, standing beside this infuriating, grinning, unrelenting human, she began to wonder if true strength was something else entirely. Perhaps it was not in the avoidance of pain. Perhaps it was in the refusal to let it win.